There's a lie that almost destroyed me. But this isn't a story about destruction. It's a story about how that lie, in the most unexpected way, became the one thing that set me free. It began on a day like any other, a quiet Tuesday afternoon, with the hum of the refrigerator and the soft glow of a cell phone screen on a granite countertop. My world didn't end with a thunderous crash. It ended with the silent tap of a finger on glass and the birth of a woman I never knew I had inside me. Our life, the one I had so carefully, so lovingly built, was a masterpiece of suburban contentment. At least that's what I told myself. It was a house with a neatly manicured lawn, 2 cars in the driveway, and a future that stretched out before us like a perfectly paved road. I was the wife. The partner. One half of an us that felt as solid and permanent as the foundation of our home. I orchestrated our world with a quiet precision, from the way the throw pillows were arranged on the sofa to the meals we shared at the end of a long day. I was the keeper of our memories, the planner of our dreams. I remember the woman I was then. She loved with an intensity that bordered on self-annihilation. She would chip away at her own edges, sanding down her own desires, just to make the pieces of their life fit together more smoothly. If he didn't like a certain kind of music, the radio station was changed. If he found one of my friends annoying, I'd see that friend less. I called it compromise. I called it love. I now know it was a slow, quiet disappearing act. The red flags, they're so obvious in hindsight, aren't they? They weren't giant, waving banners of betrayal. They were tiny, almost invisible threads. A phone call he'd take in the other room, his voice dropping to a murmur. A sudden need for privacy. A new password on his laptop that was once our shared space. The late nights at the office that felt different. There was an energy shift, a subtle distance I could feel in the space between us on the couch. But I had learned to be an expert at ignoring my own intuition. My gut would scream, and I would politely tell it to be quiet. Because he was my anchor. He was my safe harbor. And in my world, there was no room for the possibility of a storm. To even consider it felt like a betrayal in itself. The end came not with a confession or a guilty conscience. It came with a buzz, a single notification on his phone, left face up on the kitchen counter while he was in the garage. It was an innocent mistake on his part, a moment of carelessness, but for me it was a moment of brutal, clarifying destiny. I wasn't snooping. I was just walking by to get a glass of water. But the name on the screen wasn't a colleague, and the string of heart emojis that followed it weren't from his mother. In that split second, the floor fell away. The air in my lungs turned to ice. My entire reality, the life I had poured every ounce of my soul into, fractured into a million unrecognizable pieces. I picked up the phone. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. He'd told me the new passcode just last week, an excuse about work security protocols. And there it was. A thread of messages not meant for my eyes. A whole other life, a whole other person living in the shadow of ours. The man who slept beside me every night, the man whose scent was on my pillows, was a complete and utter stranger. The pain is a physical thing. It's not just a broken heart. It's a gut punch that knocks the wind out of you and leaves you gasping. It's a cold dread that starts in your stomach and spreads through your veins, drowning you from the inside out. There's no blood, but you feel like you're bleeding to death. The confrontation was a masterclass in manipulation. It was a blur of frantic denials, of twisted logic and half-truths. He told me I was misunderstanding, that I was taking it out of context, that I was being overly emotional, dramatic, crazy. He tried to gaslight me into believing that the truth I had just read with my own 2 eyes was a figment of my insecure imagination. For a desperate moment, I almost wanted to believe him. It would have been so much easier to retreat back into the comfortable lie. But once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. The house of cards had been built, and I had just pulled out the bottom one. I stood there and watched it all come tumbling down. The divorce wasn't really a choice. It was the only possible outcome of a truth that could no longer be ignored. But knowing it's inevitable doesn't make it any less shattering. The days that followed were a thick, suffocating fog of grief. The house, once my sanctuary, became a monument to our broken promises. The silence was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It filled the spaces where our laughter used to be, where we used to talk about our future, our plans, our children that we would one day have. Who was I, if not his wife? If not one half of us? The question echoed in the empty rooms of my life. I had spent so long defining myself by my relationship to him that I had forgotten how to exist on my own. I grieved for the man I thought he was. I grieved for the future I had lost. I grieved for the woman I used to be, the naive, trusting woman who believed in forever. The nights were the worst. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every memory, searching for clues I had missed, torturing myself with the what-ifs and the why-nots. I cried in the shower, the sound of the water masking the pathetic broken sobs that I couldn't hold back. I felt a paralyzing fear I'd never known. How would I manage financially? Our lives were so intertwined. What would people say? I could already feel the whispers, the pitying looks. The thought of starting over, from scratch, at this point in my life, felt less like a new beginning and more like a life sentence. Getting out of bed in the morning was a monumental victory. Putting one foot in front of the other was an act of Herculean strength. This was my rock bottom, a lonely, desolate desert, where every direction looked the same. And it was there, in the deepest, darkest part of the pit, that something shifted. It wasn't a lightning bolt. It wasn't a grand, cinematic moment of revelation. It was a quiet, defiant whisper from a part of myself I thought had long since died. It happened one morning, after another sleepless night. I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror, and for the first time, I truly saw the woman staring back at me. Her eyes were hollow, her skin was pale, her shoulders were slumped in defeat. She looked exhausted, diminished. And I didn't recognize her. That wasn't me. The real me, the girl I was before all this, was still in there somewhere, buried under years of compromise and self-neglect. In that moment, a switch flipped. I realized that staying in the ruins of that marriage, trying to glue back the pieces of his lie, would mean accepting his version of reality as my own. It would mean dying a little bit inside every single day for the rest of my life. And I was worth more than that. The decision to leave stopped being about him. It was no longer about his betrayal or his lies. It was about me. It was about choosing myself. Truly, completely and unapologetically, for the first time in a very, very long time. Walking away was the hardest thing I have ever done. It meant facing the judgment of people who only saw the surface. It meant walking away not just from the man I had loved, but from the entire future I had so carefully designed. It was an act of tearing down my own life, brick by painful brick, with no blueprint for what to build in its place. It was terrifying, but it was also the first breath of fresh air, after years of holding my breath. The rebuilding was not a glamorous makeover montage. It was slow, it was messy. It was painful, and it was beautiful. It was the hard, unglamorous work of patience and self-compassion. Every box I packed to move out of our home felt like a ceremony. I wasn't just packing up books and clothes. I was packing up pieces of a life I was consciously choosing to leave behind. I was making room. Slowly, tentatively, I started rediscovering the simple joys I had set aside for the sake of our relationship. I turned up the volume on the music he always called noise. I went to the coffee shop and ordered the flavored latte he always said was too sweet. I started calling the friends I had let fade into the background, and they welcomed me back with open arms, no questions asked. I took a solo trip, something I'd always dreamed of but had always put off, waiting for the right time with him. I remember sitting on a beach, watching the sunset alone, and feeling not lonely, but whole. I was learning to be my own best company. I started going to therapy, talking through the knots of anger and grief that had been tied so tightly in my chest. I learned to forgive myself for not seeing the signs, for ignoring my own intuition. I learned that my capacity to love so deeply wasn't a weakness. It was a strength that I had simply invested in the wrong person. I started taking myself on dates. To the movies, to a nice dinner, to a museum. At first it felt awkward, a public declaration of my solitude. But soon, it became my favorite ritual. It was an act of devotion to myself. I was learning to love what I saw, to enjoy the person I was becoming. And over time, something strange and unexpected began to happen. The sharp stabbing pain of his betrayal started to dull, and in its place grew a quiet, profound sense of gratitude. I know that sounds crazy. Grateful for the lie that shattered my world? But it's true. His lie didn't destroy me. It broke me, yes. But it broke me open. It forced me to confront the ways I had abandoned myself. It forced me to put myself back together, not as I was, but as I was always meant to be. Stronger, more authentic, more compassionate, more resilient. The woman telling you this story today is not a victim. I am not the heartbroken wife standing in a silent kitchen. I am the architect of my own happiness. I am the master of my own peace. The strength I found didn't come from a new relationship, or from revenge, or from proving him wrong. It rose from the ashes of that marriage. It was forged in the fire of that pain. He thought his lie was a secret I would never uncover, but in discovering it, I didn't lose him. I found me. And that discovery, that freedom, that slow and beautiful journey back to myself, is the greatest and most honest love story I have ever had the privilege to live. It's funny, isn't it, how a life can hinge on a single, ordinary moment. For me, it was a rainy Thursday in a crowded bookstore cafe. The air smelled like old paper and fresh brewed coffee, a combination that had always felt like a warm hug. I was tucked into a corner armchair, trying to lose myself in a novel, but the world outside kept demanding my attention, the rain drumming a frantic rhythm against the large picture window. And then, he walked in. He shook the rain from his coat, a spray of tiny diamonds catching the low light. He wasn't movie star handsome in a conventional way, but there was an energy about him, a quiet confidence that filled the space around him. He ordered his coffee, and I remember the way he smiled at the barista, a genuine, easy smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. It was a kind smile. That was the first thing I noticed. Kindness. Our eyes met across the room for just a second. It wasn't a dramatic slow-motion movie moment. It was just a connection, a brief, silent acknowledgement that we were two people sharing the same small, warm space on a cold, wet day. I quickly looked back down at my book, my heart doing a little flip-flop I hadn't expected. A few minutes later, a shadow fell over my page. I looked up, and it was him. He was holding 2 mugs. I figured anyone reading that author on a day like today could probably use a refill, he said, his voice calm and warm, like the coffee he was offering me. I'm David, by the way. That was him. That was the man I met. He was charming, but not in a slick, practiced way. He seemed genuinely interested. He asked me about my book. He asked me about my day. He listened, truly listened, in a way that made me feel like I was the only person in that crowded cafe. We talked for 3 hours, until the rain stopped and the sun was setting. The book lay forgotten in my lap. By the time I walked out of there, I felt a sense of rightness, a hum of possibility I hadn't felt in years. He felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. In those early days, he was a masterpiece of all the best qualities. He was ambitious but not ruthless. He was funny but never cruel. He was the person who would call just to say he was thinking of me, who would remember a throwaway comment I'd made weeks ago about a concert I wanted to see and then surprise me with tickets. He made me feel seen. He made me feel safe. He was my anchor in a world that often felt adrift. I remember one night, about 6 months in. We'd taken a drive out of the city, chasing a meteor shower we'd read about. We ended up on a blanket in the middle of a field, the air crisp and cold, the sky a vast, dark, velvet blanket pricked with an impossible number of stars. We weren't even talking much, just lying there, his arm around me, my head on his shoulder. He turned to me, his face illuminated by the starlight. You know, he said, his voice a low whisper. Before I met you, I always looked at the stars and felt small, but right now, lying here with you, I feel like I'm part of all of it, like we're part of it. In that moment, under that infinite sky, I believed in forever. I saw our entire future laid out before us, as clear and bright as the Milky Way. It was a promise, a silent, sacred vow that this feeling, this connection, was the foundation of everything to come. It was the most beautiful lie I had ever been told, and I believed every single word of it. Our transition from dating to marriage felt less like a step and more like a natural, inevitable exhale. It was as easy as breathing. The proposal didn't happen with a flash mob or a jumbotron. It happened on a Tuesday, in the kitchen of my tiny apartment. He had come over after work, and I was trying to follow a complicated recipe for a pasta sauce that was refusing to cooperate. I was flustered, there was tomato sauce on my cheek, and the whole room smelled faintly of burnt garlic. He just stood there, leaning against the doorframe, watching me. He had that soft, easy smile on his face. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he walked over, took the wooden spoon out of my hand, and turned off the stove. He wiped the sauce from my cheek with his thumb. "Marry me," he said. It wasn't even a question. It was a statement. A fact. Like the sky is blue, or the sun will rise tomorrow. Marry me, because I can't imagine a single day of the rest of my life without your beautiful mess in it. There was no ring yet. There was no grand speech. There was just him and me, and the overwhelming certainty that this was our beginning. In that moment, in that messy, imperfect kitchen, I had never felt more sure of anything in my entire life. Our first few years of marriage were golden. We were architects, drawing up the blueprints of our future on late-night drives and lazy Sunday mornings in bed. We bought a small house with a big backyard and a porch swing. He would mow the lawn on Saturdays while I planted flowers that always seemed to die a week later. We painted the walls a soft, hopeful yellow. That house wasn't just wood and drywall, it was a container for our dreams. We had a plan. He was climbing the ladder at his firm, and I was starting to build my own freelance business from a small desk in the corner of our guest room. We had a jar on the kitchen counter where we'd put our spare change, labeled Italy Fund. We talked about the children we would have, 2, a boy and a girl. We even had names picked out. We were a team. Us against the world, he'd say, pulling me close. And I believed it. I believed we were building an empire of love, brick by brick, day by day. The happiness was so abundant, it felt like we were swimming in it. It was in the small things. The way he'd always make the coffee in the morning because he knew I was useless without it. The inside jokes we'd whisper to each other across a crowded room at a party. The comfort of knowing that at the end of any day, good or bad, I was coming home to him. I remember one night, maybe 2 or 3 years in. I had been working on a huge project, pulling all-nighters, completely consumed by stress. I was falling apart, convinced I was going to fail. He came home from a business trip a day early. I didn't even hear him come in. I was just sitting at my desk, my head in my hands, crying silent, exhausted tears. He didn't say a word. He just came up behind me, wrapped his arms around my shoulders, and rested his chin on the top of my head. He just stood there, holding me, for what felt like an eternity. He wasn't trying to fix it. He wasn't telling me it would be okay. He was just being there. He was absorbing my fear, my exhaustion, my despair into himself. After a while, he whispered, "Let's go to bed. The world can wait until morning." He led me to our room, tucked me in like a child, and lay beside me, stroking my hair until I finally fell asleep. I woke up the next morning feeling lighter. He was already gone, but on my desk was a cup of coffee and a small note. It just said, "You are stronger than you think. But you never have to be strong alone. I've got you." That was the peak. That was the moment that I will forever hold in my mind as the zenith of our love. It wasn't the wedding day or a fancy vacation. It was that quiet, unassuming act of profound care. It was the feeling of being completely and utterly safe, of being seen and loved, not just for my strengths, but in my moments of total weakness. That was the promise. That was the man I married. That was the love I would have died for. And that memory is what made the lie, when it finally came, so completely and utterly unforgivable. Love doesn't die in an instant. It dies a death of 1,000 tiny cuts. 1,000 moments of choosing something or someone else. The shift in our marriage wasn't a seismic event. It was a slow, almost imperceptible cooling. The warmth that had been the center of my universe began to recede, leaving a subtle chill in the air that I kept trying to explain away. I'd tell myself it was just a phase, that all long-term relationships have their ebbs and flows. But this wasn't an ebb, it was a tide going out and never coming back in. It started with the phone. His phone, which had once been our phone. A shared calendar, photos we both took, a piece of community property, suddenly became a fortress. He angled it away from me when he typed. He'd take it with him into the bathroom. He'd place it face down on the nightstand before we went to sleep, a gesture as definitive as a turned back. Then came the new password. Work requirement, he said, shrugging it off. New security protocols. You know how it is. And I did know. I knew it was a lie. A small one, maybe. But it was a lock on a door that had never been closed between us before. And I was the one left standing on the outside. The late nights at the office became more frequent. But he'd come home smelling not of stale office coffee, but of a cologne he didn't own, or with a strange, frantic energy that was different from his usual end-of-day exhaustion. When I'd ask about his day, the details became vague, generic. The vibrant stories of his work life, the office politics and difficult clients he used to share with me, were replaced with a monotonous, "It was fine, just busy." He was building a wall, brick by brick, and using work as the mortar. And when I would find the courage to voice the tiny, terrified question in my heart, "Is everything okay with us?" the response was a masterclass in deflection. Suddenly I was the one who was the problem. I was being too sensitive. I was insecure. He was under a lot of pressure at work. Couldn't I see that? Why was I trying to add more stress to his life? He would turn my concern into an accusation, and my intuition into a character flaw. He made me feel guilty for feeling the distance he was creating. And the most heartbreaking part? I believed him. I would apologize. I would retreat, chastising myself for being needy, for not being a supportive wife. I became my own jailer, locking away my gut feelings because I was terrified they might be true. Our 5th anniversary was the breaking point, the moment the hairline cracks became a chasm. I had planned everything. A reservation at the little Italian place where we had our 3rd date. I bought a new dress. I spent the day feeling that old, familiar flutter of excitement, a desperate hope that this night could reset us, that it could remind us of who we used to be. He called me an hour before we were supposed to leave. "Something's come up at work," he said, his voice distant, distracted. "A crisis. I'm so sorry, babe. We'll have to rain check." I remember just standing there in my new dress, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. I knew. In my bones, I knew he wasn't at the office. The lie was so loud, so obvious. It was buzzing in the air around me. I spent our anniversary alone, eating takeout pizza on the floor of our living room, staring at the hopeful yellow walls we had painted together, and I felt the color draining from my world. But knowing and seeing are two different things. The real end didn't come with that phone call. It came 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday that was so painfully ordinary, it makes the memory even more surreal. He was in the garage, looking for something. He'd left his phone on the kitchen counter, screen up. I was just getting a glass of water. I wasn't looking for anything, I swear I wasn't. But then it lit up. A buzz, a flash of light, and a name I didn't recognize. And then the message preview. "Last night was amazing, can't stop thinking about you." Followed by a string of hearts. Red, pulsating hearts on a cold white screen. Time stopped. The glass of water in my hand felt impossibly heavy. The hum of the refrigerator became a roar. It felt like the laws of physics had ceased to apply. My feet were on the floor, but I was falling. My hand, when I reached for the phone, was not my own. It was shaking, an alien thing at the end of my arm. I typed in the passcode he'd given me, the one for his new work security protocols. And there it was. Not just one message, but months of them, a whole world. A secret life lived in parallel to ours. Nicknames, inside jokes, photos, declarations of love, plans for a future that didn't include me. The man I had shared a bed with last night, the man whose scent was on my pillow, the man who had held me and told me I was stronger than I thought. He didn't exist. He was a fiction, and I was his fool. The pain, it wasn't emotional, it was a physical assault. My lungs refused to draw breath. A cold, metallic taste filled my mouth. I felt a scream building in my chest, a primal howl of such agony that I had to physically clamp my hand over my mouth to keep it from escaping. When he walked back in, whistling, he saw the phone in my hand and the look on my face, and the mask dropped. For a split second I saw it, pure, unadulterated panic, but it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a cold, calculating defense. The conversation that followed is a scar on my memory. It wasn't an apology. It was a war. He denied it. With the evidence right there in my hand, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "It's not what you think." He told me she was just a friend from work who was going through a hard time, that I was twisting her words, that I was reading into things. He tried to make me the villain. After everything I do for us, this is how you repay me? By snooping through my phone? You have trust issues. He weaponized our history, our love, against me. Every protest I made was met with a new accusation. I was hysterical. I was emotional. I was crazy. He was chipping away at my sanity, trying to make me doubt the reality I was holding in my own two hands. I stood there, in the middle of our kitchen, on the floor we had picked out together, under the lights we had installed, and I watched the man I loved transform into a monster. A cruel, selfish stranger, who was more concerned with saving his own skin than with the fact that he had just shattered my entire soul. And in that moment, I knew. I knew that the man I had married was gone. Maybe he had never been there at all. The only thing left was the lie. And me, standing in the rubble. After the storm of his lies in the kitchen, there was a strange, dead calm. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a hollow, ringing silence. He seemed to think he had won. He had thrown every accusation, every manipulation at me, and I had simply stopped responding. I think he mistook my shock for surrender. He went to bed that night, as if it were any other, expecting, I suppose, that by morning the whole ugly business would be swept under the rug, and I would fall back into line. But I didn't sleep. I sat on the sofa in the living room, the one we picked out together, and I watched the moon trace a slow, silver path across the floor. I wasn't crying anymore. I was thinking. I was replaying not just that night, but years of my life, seeing every red flag I had ignored, every gut feeling I had silenced. I saw, with a clarity that was both terrifying and liberating, that the man sleeping in our bed wasn't just a cheater. He was a thief. He had stolen my trust, my peace of mind, and years of my life. The final straw wasn't the text message. It was what happened the next morning. I was still on the couch when he came downstairs, dressed for work. He poured himself a coffee, completely ignoring me. Then, he walked over, stood in front of me, and set his mug down on the coffee table. He looked down at me, not with remorse, but with a cold, dismissive annoyance. "Are we done with this drama now?" he asked, his voice flat, "because I have a big day at work, and I really don't have time for this." That was it. This drama. The complete and utter shattering of my world, the end of our marriage, the discovery of his secret life, was an inconvenience. A bit of drama he didn't have time for. In that moment, he didn't just seem like a stranger. He seemed inhuman. All the love I had ever felt for him curdled into something that felt like ash in my mouth. I looked up at him from the couch, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just empty. "I want a divorce," I said. The words came out quiet, but they felt like the heaviest things I had ever lifted. He actually laughed. A short, sharp, incredulous bark. "You don't want a divorce," he said, like he was correcting a child. "You're just emotional right now. You're going to throw away everything we've built because you're having a little fit?" "There is no we," I said, standing up, and for the first time, I felt taller than him. "There is you, and your lies, and then there is me, and I am done." His face changed then. The condescension vanished, replaced by a flash of rage. He saw that he had lost control. The fight that followed wasn't loud or violent. It was cold and cruel. He told me I would have nothing, that I would be nothing without him, that he would make sure everyone knew I was crazy. It wasn't a plea to save our marriage. It was a threat, a punishment for my defiance. I packed a single bag that day. I took my laptop, a few clothes, and the framed photo of my grandparents from my nightstand. As I walked out the front door of the house with the hopeful yellow walls, I didn't look back. The process was not amicable. It was a war fought in conference rooms, and through passive-aggressive emails from his lawyer. He contested everything. He argued over every piece of furniture, every dollar in our savings account. It was his final, desperate attempt to control me, to punish me for leaving. The most difficult moment came during the deposition. I was sitting in a sterile, windowless room, across a long, polished table from him and his attorney. His lawyer, a woman with a sharp suit and an even sharper smile, spent 2 hours trying to dismantle me. She used my grief against me. She brought up times I had been emotional, times I had seen a therapist for anxiety years ago, twisting my vulnerability into a weapon to prove that I was unstable, unreliable. And he just sat there, my husband, the man who once held me and told me I never had to be strong alone. He just sat there and watched. He nodded along as she painted me as a hysterical, paranoid woman. That was a pain worse than the discovery of the affair. It was the public execution of my character by the one person who was supposed to protect me. After months of that slow, grinding torture, we finally reached a settlement. The day I went to sign the final papers, I was terrified. This was the period at the end of the sentence. The final amputation. I walked into my lawyer's office, and the thick stack of papers was sitting on the desk. It looked so official, so permanent. I sat down, and my lawyer slid the document and a pen in front of me. I picked up the pen, and I remember my hand was shaking. I looked for the line where I was supposed to sign. And there it was. My name, printed neatly, followed by a blank space. I took a deep breath, the kind you take before you dive into cold water, and I signed. The stroke of the pen felt loud in the silent room. And then it was over. I expected to feel a crushing wave of sadness. And there was sadness, yes, a deep, aching grief for the future I had lost, for the man I thought I had married. But underneath it, something else was stirring. A small, quiet, powerful feeling I hadn't felt in a very long time. It was relief. It was the feeling of a cage door swinging open. I was alone. I was scared. My future was a complete unknown. But for the first time in years, it was mine. The first few months after the divorce were a strange new country. I had my own apartment, a small place with big windows that looked out over a street I didn't know. The silence was the first thing I noticed. It was different from the silence in the house we had shared. That silence had been heavy, full of unspoken things. This silence was just empty. It was a blank canvas. And frankly, it terrified me. There were days when the loneliness was a physical weight, pinning me to the bed. I missed the idea of him. I missed the comfort of having a person, even if that person wasn't real. But then, there were these little flashes of light. The first time I bought a piece of art, a loud, abstract painting he would have called a mess, and hung it on my living room wall, I just stood there and smiled. It was my wall. It was my mess. I started eating ridiculously spicy food, something he never liked. I played my music, the sad, slow, singer-songwriter stuff, as loud as I wanted, whenever I wanted. These weren't grand acts of rebellion. They were tiny, quiet acts of reclamation. I was planting my own flag in this new solitary land. I was learning that freedom wasn't a party. It was the quiet, steady permission you give yourself to simply be. The real work, the deep work, started in a small, quiet office with a kind-faced therapist who taught me how to be a cartographer of my own grief. She helped me map out the pain, to see where it came from, to understand that his betrayal was about his brokenness, not mine. I learned to sit with my anger without letting it consume me. I learned to cry without feeling pathetic. And most importantly, I learned to forgive myself. I forgave myself for ignoring the red flags, for silencing my own intuition. I forgave that younger version of myself for loving so completely, so naively. Her capacity for love wasn't the problem. The recipient was. I called my old friends, the ones I had let drift away. I was so ashamed, so afraid of their judgment, but they just wrapped me up in their arms and welcomed me home. With them, I started laughing again, a real, deep-in-the-belly laugh I hadn't heard in years. I joined a hiking group, and I spent weekends climbing mountains, my lungs burning, my legs aching, and with every step up, I felt like I was leaving a piece of the old me behind. I was proving to myself, step by painful step, that my own 2 feet were strong enough to carry me. Today, my life looks nothing like the one I had planned. I live in that same small apartment, but it's not empty anymore. It's filled with plants I've managed to keep alive, with stacks of books, with the smell of good coffee, and with the evidence of a life that is truly my own. My freelance business, the one I started in the corner of a guest room, is now my entire world. I work with clients I love, on projects that challenge and excite me. My routine is simple, it's quiet, it's mine. The woman I am now, she's different. She's slower to trust, yes, but she's quicker to trust herself. I learned that my gut feeling is not an overreaction. It's a compass. And I will never, ever ignore it again. I learned that love isn't about losing yourself in someone else. It's about finding someone who is brave enough to let you be your fullest self, and who you can offer that same grace in return. I learned that being alone is not the same as being lonely. I have built a life so full of friendship and purpose and joy that a relationship would be an addition, not the main event. Have I forgiven him? That's the question everyone asks. And the answer is complex. I don't think about him much, to be honest. Forgiving him, in the traditional sense, feels irrelevant. It's like asking if I've forgiven a hurricane for hitting the coast. It was a destructive force that passed through my life. What I have done is forgive the situation. I have made peace with the fact that my story has this scar running through it. Because that scar is a reminder of my own strength. I have let go of the anger, not for his sake, but for mine. I refuse to carry his baggage for the rest of my life. I set it down, right there in the rubble, and I walked away. As for the future, I don't have a 5-year plan anymore. I don't have names picked out for children I may or may not have, and that used to terrify me. Now it feels like the ultimate freedom. I'm open. I'm not closed off to the idea of love. I believe in love, maybe now more than ever. But I believe in a different kind of love, a love that is honest and kind, and built on the solid ground of 2 whole people, not 2 halves trying to make a whole. But I'm not waiting for it. I'm not looking for it. I am busy living. I am busy building this beautiful, messy, imperfect, and glorious life. The lie he told was meant to be my prison, but he never realized I was the one holding the key all along. And the life I have now, this one right here, this is the truth. If I could reach back through time, back to that quiet Tuesday afternoon, and speak to the woman standing in that kitchen, the woman whose world was just fractured by the glow of a cell phone screen, what would I say to her? I would wrap my arms around her shaking shoulders, and I would whisper, "Breathe. Just breathe. This is the moment your life breaks, but I need you to know, it is not the moment your life ends. This pain you feel, this agony that is so profound you think it will swallow you whole, it won't. It is the fire, and you are the steel, and you are about to be forged into something unbreakable." I would tell her that her instinct, that quiet, terrified voice in her gut, that she has been silencing for years, is not her enemy, it's her guide. It's her truth. And it's the only voice she needs to listen to from this moment on. I would tell her, your worth was never up for his negotiation. You are not 1/2 of a whole. You were born whole. You just forgot. And you are about to remember. And if you are listening to this right now, and you are in your own kitchen, staring at your own shattering truth, if you are lying awake at night, staring at a ceiling that feels like it's about to crush you, I see you. I know the suffocating silence of a house full of broken promises. I know the terror of a future that has been erased. And I know the profound loneliness that makes you feel like you are the only person on earth who has ever felt this broken. But please, hear me when I say this. Your story is not over. This is not the end. This is the moment the ground gives way so you can learn to fly. The journey back to yourself will be the hardest thing you ever do. It will be messy, and it will be slow. There is no magic fix. There are just small, brave choices you make every single day. The choice to get out of bed. The choice to call a friend. The choice to buy the flowers, and play the music, and build a life, moment by moment, that is unapologetically your own. You will learn that being alone is not a punishment. It's an opportunity. It is the quiet, sacred space where you finally get to meet yourself again. and you will discover a strength inside you that you never knew you possessed. A resilience that has been dormant, just waiting for you to call on it. The lie that broke you is not your story. Your story is what you do next. It's how you rise. It's how you take the rubble of the life someone else tried to destroy, and you build a goddamn palace. A palace where you are the queen. He thought his lie was the end of my world. But he was wrong. It was the beginning of mine. It was the lie that forced me to finally find my own truth. And that truth is this. The greatest, most enduring, most faithful love you will ever experience is the love you build with yourself. And your great love story, it's just getting started.